Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TradeStation Masterclass. My name is Jesus Nava, Director of Client Training and Education for TradeStation Securities, and it's always a pleasure to join you guys to talk about TradeStation today. We are going to do a class on our Strategy Elements series, where we highlight some of the tools available on TradeStation to help you develop strategies. The topic is optimization methods. Last week, Wednesday, to be more specific, we talked about optimization in general, but there are different layers of optimization we can talk about. And I decided to have just a session to explain what are the differences between the different methods of optimization that TradeStation provides. Before we jump into today's topic, here's some important disclosures. Just keep in mind that every symbol and idea that I talk about is for educational purposes only. It is not a recommendation of TradeStation. Also, active trading is not suitable for everyone, and past historical performance is no indication of future results. For additional information on disclosures, you see a link right here on this PowerPoint slide, www.tradestation.com/important-information. Okay, let me go ahead and switch over to my TradeStation platform. All right. I have a chart here already, and I have, if you see the chart, I have a regular, Bollinger Band. Let me go ahead and load more data onto this chart. I'm going to do 60 days of data. Now, you saw that I did that very quickly by just typing the historical request in. TradeStation is great at responding to keyboard commands, and I use them a lot. So if I wanted to load historical data, I just type in 60 space days, and it takes that as a historical data request, and it downloads 60 days of data for me. If I look at the strategy performance report here, of course, this is no changes on the strategy whatsoever. This is Apple on a 5-minute interval, going back 60 days. The strategy, it's okay, not doing that bad. Of course, I have no commission costs, I have no slippage, I have nothing additional on this strategy to manage my money. This is just the Bollinger Band. So, you guys know that when I look at strategies like this one, I usually like to see the indicator along with the strategy just to see where these signals are being generated. So just to make sure that it makes sense visually, at least. Let me go ahead and add the study. As I said, this is just based on the simple Bollinger Band that is already built into your TradeStation. All right. So like over here, we saw the price activity for Apple break the upper band. And once it went inside, then it met the criteria for the Bollinger Band strategy. By the way, I just noticed that my strategy is using different parameters. I think I was in the process of preparing for the class, and I set up an optimization and it automatically selected different parameters. But let me go over here, and I noticed because, I was looking at this short entry and I said, well, that doesn't make sense. It seems like Apple went inside the channel a few bars before the entry was generated. So let's go ahead and confirm that. Let me go ahead and zoom in this area right here. So yeah, for example, you can see how these two green candles, they close on top or above the upper band. And then we have a candle over here that closed below. This right here, this is the condition for the short entry. So once it meets the condition, it should have generated an entry over here, but it didn't. It actually waited for 2 bars. And that's why I sat there and I said, well, this doesn't make sense. Why isn't it generating the trade back here? The reason is because I started doing an optimization, and notice over here on the very top on the status bar, you can see the inputs of my strategy. It says 18 and 1.75, which are definitely not the default parameters of the Bollinger Band strategy. So before we continue, let me go ahead and set those parameters to how they come on by default. So let me go ahead and double click on my strategy, double click on my long entry. The defaults are 20 and 2. And for the short entry is 20 and This is, okay, and 2. Okay, I don't think I have to use a negative number here. I think the strategy will automatically switch it to negative. Okay, so we have, if we look at the same, area that we had looked at before, take a look. Now it's not even looking at these 2 bars that I had identified before. It's going back even further. It's looking back at these 2 candles. You can see how they closed on, above the blue line. We went inside the channel on this red candle, generated the order for the next bar. So what happened here, even though it also meets the criteria for the short entry on the bars that I pointed out, the fact that it's already in a short trade means that it doesn't take that other one. So if we didn't have a short trade here, then it would have generated the trade, over here. But remember that the strategies by default only take one trade in one direction at a time, which means that if you are already short, it won't add to your position unless you tell it to. So we can turn on pyramiding if we want, but that's not the subject of today's class. So let's go back and zoom out. And for those of you that are new to masterclass, now I just wanted to give you a little bit of information of what optimization is. Optimization is a process that is built into the TradeStation platform to help you test different parameters. The Bollinger Band by default uses a 20-bar moving average. That's the gray line that you see right there in the middle, 20 bars. And the upper band and the lower band are calculated using 2 standard deviations. Now, of course, those are default parameters. It doesn't mean that those are the best parameters for Apple or the best parameters on a 5-minute chart. It's a combination of different factors that affect the performance of the strategy. The symbol you're using, because every symbol moves differently, and you have to design a strategy based on the movements of the symbols that you want to trade. And another big factor is time frame. As you change the time frame of the chart, you're going to see the fluctuations in price are going to be different, especially on a study like the Bollinger Band. Those penetrations of the upper band and the lower band are going to be in different places as you change the time frame. So of course, optimizing the strategy, you have to think about, well, I'm optimizing the strategy on Apple, I'm optimizing the strategy on a 5-minute, and those are factors to take into consideration. But the parameters themselves, we always have a starting point. And the Bollinger Band uses 20 bars for that moving average and 2 standard deviations for the upper band and the lower band. But it doesn't mean that those are the best for this particular test. So optimization allows you to run a series of tests in sequence automatically very fast. I mean, I can go there manually and say, well, let me test, instead of a 20, I'm going to test a 15 bar, and I can change the 20 to 15. And instead of using 2 standard deviations, I say, well, let's use 1 instead. Let's do that manual process right here so you get an idea. So double click, and I can do 15 here and 1. Okay, and let's do the same thing for the other one, 15 and 1. Okay, manually changing the parameters. If I want to have an indicator that matches that as well, I have to change this to 15, 1, and -1. All right, so we changed the calculation of the strategy. How did it perform? If I go to data and strategy performance report, you see the strategies more like a break-even strategies. The profit factor is 1.02. We only made $300, but you can see that the gross profit is 14,000, and then we lost 13,700. So not a good strategy using using the parameters that I supplied. If I go back to the strategy, let me go here to edit strategies, and I change them to the default parameters, which is 20 and 2. Then you get a slightly better performance. Not to say that those are the best parameters. Notice that I'm changing the parameters manually. So optimization is this process to go through a series of parameter combinations and pick the ones that are optimal for this strategy backtest. I think we talked about this extensively in our last session. And I think I'm talking a little bit more than I should on this particular topic because you have that recording from last Wednesday. Let me concentrate more on the different methods of optimization because at the very end of class last week, we talked about in sample and out of sample, which is something that everyone that is using optimization should use. And that's why it's there, because finding optimal entries on data that already happened, anybody can do that. I mean, we can sit here, look at a chart and find out the areas that would have generated the best trades. A computer can do that better than us. I mean, it can go and calculate those entry points with the utmost precision and give us a very good back test. And that's data that's already there. So curve fitting the strategy to something that already happened, it's very easy. The tough part, the hardest part about optimization is making sure that those parameters that you're picking are consistently giving you good results. And splitting up your data, the historical data, into in sample and out of sample is kind of simulating, that forward testing. When you take a piece of the data, let's say 30% of the data, and you hide it from optimization, the strategy process will not use it to find optimal parameters. It'll only use a 70%. So it'll use a 70% that the data of the data that it sees, and it finds optimal parameters in that 70%. And once it finds those optimal parameters, it applies them to the remaining 30% to see if they hold true. If you have a good performance on the 70%, you have to make sure that you have that same or similar performance in the 30%. Where do you set that up? Well, let me set an optimization here. If you go into the optimization process, I'm going to format the long entry, select the length, optimize. These are not the defaults. Let me do something. Let me cancel, and close out of this. I'm going to remove the strategy, and I'm going to put it on one more time. Studies, add strategies, and I'm going to select these two Bollinger Bands. And the reason I'm doing this is because once you start doing optimization range of values, the chart remembers those ranges, and I just wanted to see the default. So let me double click on the long entry, click on the length, optimize. Okay, this looks more like it. It's going to test from 10 to 30. By the way, if you didn't see my Wednesday class last week, please do it. I'm going to go through these settings a little bit quick. But if you didn't, if you were not here last Wednesday, the Wednesday class gives you a little bit more of a foundation, a more basic class on optimization. I'm just going to click OK here, optimize, and OK. Then double click on the short entry, optimize, click OK, select the second numeric input, optimize, click OK, and OK. By selecting the numeric inputs and selecting ranges, I have a test count of 1,089, which is not excessive. And you're going to see, before I click away from this window, that there's an advanced settings here on the right-hand side. This is where you select how you're going to split up the data. Notice that by default, I think this is the default, shows 0 and 0. So by default, the strategy or the optimization process is going to use 100% of the data. It will not split it up, which is, okay. I mean, if you are understanding what you're doing, I mean, you can use 100% of the data and manage the data elsewhere. So instead of splitting the data here, you do your manual splits and say, well, on this chart, I'm going to load from the 1st of January to the 31st of March. So I'm only loading 3 months of data. That's a manual data selection. You optimize the strategy, you look at the parameters that it's selected, and then you take those parameters and you say, well, now I'm going to test those same parameters from April 1st to June 30th. So you have a 3-month test on parameters that were selected on the first 3 months of the year. So you can do that manual process and split the data that way. That's totally fine. Or you can do what I'm doing here, which is I'm going back 60 days and I can reserve a percentage of data as a out of sample. This is an out of sample window. You can exclude the first 30 or the last 30. I'm going to do the last 30. Usually that's what's recommended. You know, that's the data that's more recent. So you have that behavior of the market that it's going on at the moment. If you do the inverse, you know, it's kind of going backwards. You know, you're optimizing on data right now and then applying those parameters on historical data, which you may have a method of doing that or a reason or an objective of doing that. But for the most part, we want to reserve the recent data as an out of sample. Don't look at that data. So let's go ahead and do 30%. I'm going to click OK. And here on this other side, you have two drop downs. This is basically what we wanted to talk about in this class, the type of optimization and the method. The type, we have two. We have a standard and we have a walk forward. We're going to talk about those two today. And in methods, which is the main topic of today's session, we have two also. We have exhaustive and then we have genetic. We'll talk about those two as well. But for default settings, you're going to see standard and you're going to see here exhaustive. Exhaustive just gives you every single parameter combination. So whatever ranges we selected for the Bollinger Bands length and standard deviations, those ranges came up to be 1,089 tests. Let's run this and see how long it takes. And exhaustive, as I said just a moment ago, it's going to run every single parameter combination and select the best. Now, one thing to keep, you see, that was very quick. I mean, to run 1,089 different times in 15 seconds, I think that's pretty impressive, considering that you have not 6 months, you have 60 days of 5-minute data. It is 1,089 different strategy performance reports that it needs to run and calculate. We're calculating here on best net profit, and it automatically selects the best results for you. Let's go here to my optimization report. Okay, let me maximize this and let me enlarge the font. Let me go here to customize window, and I'm going to make this a bold 12. All right, so this is the report. You can see that the best, actually, no, I changed the fitness factor. This is something that we talked about on my Wednesday class, but you can see the one that is highlighted in gray, which is the one that the optimization selects as optimal, is row number 20, which is not the one that has the best net profit, because my fitness factor, I think in this particular run was, what was it? Was it the profit factor, the win-loss ratio? Let's see, let me sort by that. No, it wasn't that. Maybe percent profitability? No, not that either. So let's go ahead and see why it selected those parameters as the best ones. Was it maybe, let's take a look. I think it's better than guessing. Let me close out my optimization report. That setting where you find or where you set the fitness factor for your optimizations right here in settings, preferences, and I'm going to go here to strategy. So it is doing it on net profit. Okay, I think I know what the problem is. Net profit, highest 200 bars, because I thought that I hadn't made any changes, and I'm right. I mean, I didn't make any changes. So let's go here back to the optimization report. The reason why, and let's go ahead and sort by net profit again. It threw me off for a moment there. The reason why it's not at the very top, it's not this one, row number 1. It's because we are combining all data. Everybody sees this drop down at the very top. We split up the data into in sample 70%, out of sample 30%. But what this is doing is combining the performance of all the data. So if we go in here in this drop down and we go to in sample only, then notice that we are number one at the very top. What does that mean? What is that trying to tell you? It's telling you that when it optimized on the 70% of data, it found that this parameter combination, 22, 3, 10, and 1, was the best resulting parameter combination. When we applied those same results to out of sample, to the data that the strategy did not see, where are we? We're right here, row number 168. These are the same parameters that made us the best profit, and this is the performance on the out of sample data, the data that it didn't see. So you can see that it didn't perform well in the out of sample, which is the real test, because as I said before, optimizing a strategy on data that it's there, it's very simple to do. Anybody can do that. Pick out, best entry and exit points. It is when you take those parameters and you apply them to data that the strategy hasn't seen, that you're really putting the strategy to the test and see, well, how much money are you making? In this particular example, you can see that the net profit is only $20. It was only able to capture $20 in that 30% of data that it didn't see. So you can already see that these are the parameters that would be ideal for this strategy. In fact, if we combine the in sample and the out of sample, and we go to all data, the one that gives you the best results are here at the top, which is 14, 2, 22, and 1. It gives you a combined net profit of $59.38. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to apply this test to the chart. So now notice how the gray highlight moves to the top. I know that I'm using these on the chart already because it automatically sends that information, but I can switch back and forth. I can say, well, let me look at the in sample. So in the in sample test, let me scroll down, that was row number 92. So if we rank all the results, this is number 92 with a net profit of $26.41. How much money did it made in the out of sample? Notice that it's row number 2. So let's go here, out of sample again. You can see that it's row number 2. So we can see that we have a better performance in the out of sample than what we did in the in sample. Maybe the difference a little bit too much. I would probably find something that's kind of the same or similar results. Having an out of sample that exceeds the performance of the in sample, it's a little bit doubtful. It happens, of course. Your strategy can perform better forward than it did in the past. Of course, that's something that is possible. But I would be more comfortable with a result that it's kind of at parity, where you see the same performance on the out of sample and the in sample. But this is the way that you manage the data here to find, parameters that are performing well, not only in the in sample, but also in the out of sample. The optimization window gives you the top 200 because that's a setting. I'm not sure if you saw it, but if you go to settings, preferences right here in the chart, and you go to strategy, this keeps the highest 200. If you want to see more results, you're welcome to increase that number, but I think 200 is a good number. It's just going to pick the top 200. But if you want to see more, of course, it's open for you to do that. Let's go back in here. I'm going to double click on this. Let's go and set the optimization one more time. I'm going to double click here. Optimize. I'm not going to change the parameters because I want to show you something. Okay, so we're back at optimization. We have a test count of 1,089. Right here under type, we can go into walk forward. Walk forward. Walk forward is a different type of optimization. It's an animal in its own, and And we're going to talk about walk forward optimization in the next couple of weeks. So we're going to reserve the next 2 Wednesdays just to talk about walk forward and see how we can use it. But in order for you to set it up, you have to come in here and you have to set what's called a walk forward test name. What walk forward does, and just to give you a little bit of an introduction, we'll talk more about it next Wednesday. But what it does, it splits the data into in sample and out of sample. The same thing that we did when we went over here into advanced settings, this box right here is doing exactly that, but on steroids. It's even doing more than that, where it not only uses 30%, it varies that percentage of in sample of out of sample, because it really puts the data to a stress test. Because maybe 30%, you know, I'm reserving 30% here, but what if reserving 40% or 50% gives me a better out of sample segment, gives me a better, a more robust result that I can trust? You know, those are the type of numbers or variables that you can adjust to have a different performance value. So the walk forward optimizer changes not only the number, not only the percentage of data that's being reserved, but the number of runs that it's going to do in a particular test. So we'll talk about that more next Wednesday. But when you set up the optimization here type to walk forward, you have to give it a name. I'm going to give it the name of AAPL, although the name automatically includes the symbol. I'm just going to call it Apple 5-minute. So I know it's a 5-minute chart of Apple. When I optimize this, the optimization process is the same. It doesn't change. It's going to save all that data, but it's not only going to save the top 200. I think it saves everything into a file that I can open up in the walk forward optimizer. So let me just show you very quickly here, just as an introduction. We'll talk about it next week. In the applications, you should find the walk forward optimizer. So let me open it up. You can see that it looks totally different than the TradeStation platform. There wasn't a lot of styling that was done here in this software. This is a piece of software that TradeStation acquired many years back. So it wasn't really programmed by TradeStation. But here, if you go to File and you go to open a walk forward test, you're going to see a listing of all the different tests that are ready for you to do a walk forward analysis on. So here we see Apple 5-minute, and it names it Apple 5-minute. You can see that it's double the name because that's exactly what it assigns to my walk forward file name. But again, if your intention is to do walk forward optimization, join me next Wednesday and the following Wednesday. We're going to talk about that extensively. So let's go back here into my strategy. Double click here again. Let me optimize this one more time. I'm just using default ranges. All right, so now we understand standard is pretty much keeping optimization right here on the TradeStation platform. When you use standard, you can go into advanced settings and do your own splitting of data. You can specify a percentage of data to be used as out of sample. You can decide whether it is the data at the end or the data at the beginning. You can specify date ranges, whatever you want to do, but everything is done here. So standard is exactly what I just showed you today and last Wednesday. We're going to go into the suggest button in a moment, and I'll tell you exactly what that means. Exhaustive. Let's talk about exhaustive and genetic. Exhaustive, and I think I explained this just a moment ago, it's going to run every single parameter combination. Whatever ranges you specify, it's going to do every single combination that it finds. It's exhaustive. Sometimes exhaustive could be a long optimization. I'm not sure if you guys have done optimizations before. I know that some of you do strategy development. What is the longest you guys have waited for an optimization to complete? I mean, that's a question for you guys. If you've done optimization in the past, let us know how long you've waited for the computer to finish. I know, Rich says he gave up. I know that sometimes, it could be, yeah, like PSK says 24 hours. You could leave the computer running these optimization for hours or even days to complete because of the number and the magnitude of different parameter combinations that you supply. The number of tests right here, 1,089 is quick. You saw that I ran that number and it took about 20 seconds to complete, but I can really provide bigger ranges here and provide a bigger number. Let's go ahead and set it up. I'm going to optimize. I'm going to increase this from 10 to 50 in increments of 1. And for the number of standard deviations, I'm going to go from 1 to 3 in increments of a quarter. Okay, let's do the same thing for the other one. I'm going to optimize 10 to 50 in increments of 1. And then for the standard deviations, I'm going to go 1 to 3 in increments of a quarter. How many tests do we have? 136,161. You saw that, the range of inputs that I selected wasn't that crazy, but still, look at the number of tests. Every time you change one of the inputs or one of the parameters to optimize, is going to exponentially increase the number of tests in your optimization. You saw the ranges that I selected, and notice my test count is 136,000. It'll give me an estimate if I run exhaustive. Let me see if I get an estimate right away. Let me click on optimize here. It's doing exhaustive. Take a look. The estimated time to completion, it gave it to me very quick, is about 20 minutes, which is pretty fast. I mean, if you ask me to do 136,000 tests. But if you want something quicker and you don't want to wait the 19 minutes, let me go ahead and abort this right here, abort. And I'm going to cancel and restore original inputs. Okay, so if you don't want to wait the 22 minutes that it takes, or 24 hours, or 3 days that it's going to take, I know that sometimes you may have millions of different tests. Let's go ahead and set it up a little bit higher. Let me go ahead and select this. This is, I'm going to go all the way to 100 in increments of 1. Yeah, I'm going to have to change the historical test there. 1 to 3. Yep, I can go from a quarter to 3. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Optimize 10 to 100, increment of 1. And number of standard deviations is going to start at a quarter. Okay, and when I click OK, notice the test count 1,192,000. Let me go to properties for all. Increases maximum number of bars to 100. We talked about this last week, so make sure that you watch that class if you're not sure why we're changing it. So the test count, let me optimize and see what's my estimated time. It should be about an hour. Well, it's 5 hours right here, 4 hours. It's picking up speed, so you can see that approximately 4 hours. So I can sit here for 4 hours and wait this to complete. Or let me go ahead and restore original inputs. Let's set it up one more time. And use a method of genetic optimization. And yes, that's correct. Genetic, as in scientific genetic algorithms. That type of calculation has been implemented here so that you don't have to sit there for 5 hours and wait for an exhaustive, optimization to run. What does genetic optimization do? Well, let's go here into advanced settings. Advanced settings, in the box for genetic optimization, we'll have 6 different fields: generations, population size, mutation rate, crossover rate, stress test size, and stress increment percentage. A lot of these values, of course, are values that are used in genetic algorithms. And that's the reason why we have this suggest button. So you don't have to sit there and try to figure out what is an optimal amount of data that I should reserve, either for out of sample data or for genetic optimization. What number should I use? So depending on the number of tests you have and the amount of historical data you have, TradeStation will suggest. For example, if I set here my numbers to 0 up here, by the way, these two don't have to be done, simultaneously. You can choose to do one or the other. You don't have to do both. But right here, if I set them both to 0 and I click on the suggest button, you can see that it populates the 30% right in here, because it assumes that 30% of data is a good chunk of data to use as out of sample data. The same happens here. If you hit suggest, take a look at the numbers here, what they are, because as soon as I click on suggest, they'll change. Because based on this number that I saw here, the 1.2, I think it was over 1 million different parameter combinations, based on that number of tests, it's going to suggest the numbers for my genetic optimization. Notice how the number of tests was drastically reduced. Now we're not doing over 1 million, we're doing about 10,000, because the way that the parameters are going to be tested are in a genetic algorithm. What does that mean? I'm sure if you guys have read about genetic algorithms. I'm not an expert on genetic algorithms, but I'll give you a sort of my understanding or my take on this. The generations is the pools or the different groups of parameters that you're going to be creating. So the generations and the population size go hand in hand, where I'm creating 1,090 different groups of parameters, and each one of the groups is going to have 218 parameter combinations. Does that make sense? So we have generations, which are the unique groups, and inside the groups, every group will have 218 because that's our population. So it's kind of a random selection. It takes all those over 1 million different parameter combinations, and it's going to randomly select my generations and population size. Once it does that, it goes into, well, it's going to probably do that, gradually, because we have to kick in what's called the mutation rate and the crossover rate. Crossover is when it takes parameters of one generation and combines those parameters with parameters on a separate generation. That's the crossover. Because what happens when you have a generation with a population size of 218, those 218 tests are put to the test based on your fitness factor. And some will be selected and some will be discarded. This is like the survival of the fittest. So inside that size, only a few parameter combinations are going to be selected as the optimal ones. Once it finds those optimal parameter combinations, it's going to apply the crossover rate, where it takes the best of this population and crosses them over with the best of this second population. That's my crossover rate. And the mutation rate is when it randomly selects other parameters that were not in the original generations to mutate some of the elements inside of your population. So the crossover and the mutation is there for you to bring in new elements, new genes into the population, so that you can narrow down and start creating this population with the best of the best. Does that make sense? There's a lot of information online that would probably or could probably explain this on a more simpler form, but that's the way that TradeStation does this. It's a random sampling of the data to find where the sweet spot of the big population of parameters is. stress test and stress increment are if you want to modify the range of parameters that are being tested. Stress test set to 1 means that you just want to set, or you just want to use the parameters that you set by the ranges you selected. So if you don't want to introduce new parameter or new input parameters, then just leave it on 1. It will not apply stress test. But if you want to include more parameters, just to, as the name implies, it's going to put some more stress into the testing by introducing other numbers that were not within your ranges. You can, make this 2 or 3, depending on the number of additional parameters that you want to bring in. And you've already selected the starting point and the ending point for a lot of these parameters. So you're probably going to want to use those ranges. But if you want to maybe vary any of those parameters a little bit to the left or to the right, then set it to 2 or 3. And this is the stress increment. It's going to, whatever ranges you have, that is going to increment or decrease that input by 10%, and select that as a new parameter that was not included in the original test. That's why it's called a stress test. All right. But again, leaving it on 1 means that you're okay with the parameters that you selected, with the ranges that you selected, and you're going to let this genetic algorithm do its thing and select optimal parameters. So again, suggest is a way for you not to have to determine what the mutation or the crossover or the generations or the population size is, because I'm not sure if we have any if we have any scientists here or anybody here that's an expert of genetic algorithm, but I'm not. So I would not be able to tell you what's the best mutation, what's the best crossover. I would be one of those that would just hit the suggest button because I wouldn't know. But it does create a much faster optimization, because instead of doing an exhaustive, which runs through every single input parameter combination, is just going to sample the data and find the best optimal parameters. There is some write-up PSK. If you go into help here, I found that the help, it's kind of lame, when it tries to explain genetic optimization. I can't call it lame. Let me scratch that off. If somebody finds out, I won't have a job tomorrow. But let's call it a little bit brief. Okay, it's a little bit brief and doesn't go into detail as to how it does things. What I've had to do is I've had to search for online for genetic optimization, and there's a ton of information about how population is used, how mutation and crossover kick in, and that's the way that I have a kind of an understanding of what genetic optimization is. Okay, yes, brief is the word, correct. So go in here, see what we documented here in help. But since this is just not something that is proprietary of TradeStation, then you can search online as well. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and click OK to this. I'm going to do genetic. Notice that it changed the number of tests. So yeah, I don't have the 1 million and extra. I don't have the first 10,000 that it suggested. When I came over here and I clicked on suggest, it changed these parameters. So when I clicked OK, the number changed. But now I can optimize this, and let's see what my estimated, well, still 1 hour, but we're still, it's still a lot less, 80% less than what it was before, right? 48 minutes. You can see that it's going through the generations here. The generation, remember that these are the groups of parameters. It's going to generate 1,090 of those, and it's going through the 12th one. And notice how it's doing 218, which is the population size of each one of those generations. So notice how it's running through each one of those individuals and finding if it's optimal or not. So this is the process where it's discarding or saving some of those input parameters as the fittest ones. So I'm not going to sit here and wait 45 minutes, but you can already see that we have different numbers here. And we have good numbers. Net profit here, almost 9,000, much better than what we had found before. But this significantly reduces the amount of time that you would have to wait to run an optimization on multiple inputs. All right? Does that make sense? Make sure that you ask questions if you have any before we end the class here. It's pretty much, reducing the time more. Let's just leave that running here for a moment. Optimization tends to run on a separate process. So I can go here and create another chart and leave, that optimization running in the background, come back to it later. So let's go here and add a strategy. I'm going to use the same strategy. Let's go back into the settings. So when I go here to, let's start an optimization again. Optimize. For this one, I'm just selecting the default ranges. Optimize. Optimize. Okay, so we are back to the 1089. So when you have a number like this, you might as well just do exhaustive. There's no reason for you to do a genetic optimization on a number that's so low. So notice that as soon as I switch it to genetic, my test count is about 10,000. So I would not even think about genetic if I'm doing something or an optimization that has less than 10,000 tests. And if you do have the time, if you do have the couple or the few hours to wait, sometimes doing genetic, sometimes doing exhaustive is going to test every possible combination. So you are going to be sure that you're not leaving anything back that could be an optimal parameter. But if you're optimizing several inputs simultaneously, that of course exponentially increases the number of input parameter combinations. And sometimes you do have to introduce the generic algorithm. All right. And of course, you can save the results to a file if you want to. These are the, of course, optimization files. I think it saves a text file, if I'm not mistaken, with all your, text file with all your results. So you can open up in Excel and then manage the data a little bit different if you want to do so. All right. Let me click on optimize. Oh, let me not save it. So this is going to run faster than my previous one. This one says waiting. I'm not sure if it's because I already have one that is running. I should be able to run multiple optimizations simultaneously. Let me go here to File Preferences for a moment and go to my desktop and go over here under Performance. Performance is auto-configured by TradeStation. But if I use Custom, I have processes for chart analysis, and I have processes for strategy optimization tests. I'm using the one that's recommended. So probably, let me cancel out of this. Probably this optimization is just waiting for this other one to at least make some progress. Notice that I'm from 30 minutes, I'm down to 4 minutes. So the estimated time to completion seems not to calculate correctly when you first start a genetic optimization. It seems to be much faster than what we anticipated. So I'm just going to leave it run there for a moment and then come back to it. But this one right here seems to be waiting. I'm not sure how many of you have run multiple optimizations simultaneously. I don't think it's a thing that, I guess if you're a hardcore strategy developer, you may want to use optimizations on multiple charts. But then I guess the only way to circumvent this, this is the first time that I run a second optimization while one is running already, but I guess you would have to go in here into File Preferences and Desktop under Performance just to allocate some of your processes to specific cores in your computer. You want to do a custom allocation. All right, this is still waiting. Interesting. All right. Notice that my net profit hasn't changed. Still stuck at 9,691. This is about to end in just a few seconds. Let's just wait. It's going to look like any regular optimization. The optimization report, I'm expecting to see just the top 200 because that's what we selected. I should have saved it to a file just to see what the file looks like, but we can do that on a different class. It's almost reaching the generations and the populations. There we go. Now, if we go to data and go to strategy optimization report, yeah, looks exactly the same. We have more net profit though. I think on prior tests, we had less. We have out of sample data and in sample. If we use all data, you can see that the best parameter is row number 4. So the in sample performance combined with the out of sample performance. If we go to in sample, made 9,600. Out of sample, scroll down. Yep, it made about $1,600. Remember, it made less because you're not comparing the same amounts of data. Remember that you're comparing 70% to 30% of data. So the net profit is going to be less, but in proportion to that amount of data, it's kind of comparable. You can look at other factors such as the win-loss ratio. Right now it's 0.74. That's not a good win-loss ratio. That's odd. 0.74. So net profit 1679. Gross profit, gross loss. Yeah, that 0.74 makes no sense for the win-loss ratio. Well, that's a different story. I'm not sure what's being calculated here, but that's the information that I wanted to cover with you, the different methods that are out there to optimize. And just to recap, you can do an exhaustive and you can do a genetic optimization method. So depending on the number of tests, you'll have to choose one that makes sense to you, all right? That's it. So guys, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining me today. That's our class for strategy elements. Tomorrow we have John Brook. Remember the time tomorrow is 11:30 Eastern time. That's 11:30 in the morning for John Brook. He's going to show us or answer our questions on easy language. So make sure you mark your calendars and join us tomorrow. Okay. Thank you guys for being here today. And I hope to see you in a future class. Goodbye, everyone. Great having you.